Welcome to Rise, Hope, and Healing After Sexual Betrayal, where we feature weekly conversations with leading betrayal trauma experts. I'm MaryAnn Michaelis, your hostess. Before we get started, we want to make sure that you are aware of our corresponding online courses, which you can find at humanintimacy.com. We have a Rise course, which follows Season 1, focused on helping individuals in those very first betrayal stages, giving you information and tools for your recovery journey. We also have a course which focuses specifically on boundaries, an area that so many of our clients struggle with, to help you step by step create and maintain healthy boundaries for yourself. You can also find courses on communication, relationship, and many other topics, so please check them out at humanintimacy.com. Finally, you can find us at youtube.com/@human-intimacy. And please, if this podcast has been helpful for you, we invite you to like it and share it so that it can help our algorithms, so that we can help other people who may need support as well. Welcome back to Rise. I am once again joined by the lovely Dr. Karen Strange. Karen, welcome. Glad to have you here today.
Thank you, MaryAnn. I appreciate the opportunity to be with you today.
Yeah, excited for our conversation and our topic today. To our listeners and viewers, thank you so much for being here with us. We know that your time is valuable, and we truly hope that what we share today will be helpful and that you find value from spending time with us. So we've just rounded out our series focusing on boundaries, and today we are stepping into a new space, and we're going to be really looking at what is my foundation for rebuilding to help myself move forward. And today we're going to be talking about a topic that might feel a little bit sensitive, and it's our intent to treat this with delicacy, talking about the impact of betrayal on a relationship with the higher power, the betrayal that's experienced with that, and oftentimes the deconstruction and reconstruction of that part of who we are, which I think as human beings, all of us go through, trying to figure out, who am I? Do I have a higher power? How does that fit for me? And especially in the realm of betrayal, where does that fit? So, Karen, where would you like to start with this? What's your experience that you've seen with your clients in relation to their higher power and betrayal?
I appreciate the topic. I know it's a delicate topic, and we want to be sensitive that not everybody might necessarily espouse a worldview that adopts that. In my practice, I find that clients who embrace the concept of a higher power, that there's something out there that's working for their good, even through very difficult and hard circumstances, it seems like they tend to find traction in their recovery.
Okay, so how do you help clients find a concept of higher power if that doesn't work for them?
Well, certainly I can't force someone to have that. I would really encourage them is to find a group setting where they have other people who are pouring into them. Certainly a higher power is a connection, and we know that the opposite of addiction is connection. I also believe in many ways that connection for betrayed partners is very, very important. And if they don't have that, I'm going to make sure that I help them build in ways that they can have connection with others.
I love that because every single one of our clients is different. They come from different backgrounds and experiences, and obviously life experiences are related to their belief systems, and saying, is there something out there that's stronger, bigger, greater than you, that has more power than you, or more wisdom or knowledge, and something that's more expansive? Most of the time my clients will say, yeah, absolutely. I go to my group because there's wisdom in other people's experiences. I just had a male betrayed partner, a client, and his higher power was the ocean. And that was a really great place for him to visualize and see himself going and looking for peace and wisdom, and also a place for him to let go of things. And so whatever that looks like, being able to say, is there something possibly greater than I that has more wisdom, knowledge, power? And I think with betrayal, we are looking for something to hold on to that makes sense, can give us hope, that says we can make it through, and we're looking for meaning as well. So as we start out this conversation, I really want to validate that experience of feeling lost that shows up with betrayal. I'd love to hear your thoughts, Karen, on how the betrayal impacts a relationship with a higher power. What have you seen?
Well, certainly I've had clients who they'll say to me, and I'm quoting them, why did God let this happen to me? I've done what I'm supposed to do. They're looking for the why. And some people are angry with their higher power. And so, as a woman of faith, I'm going to just use the expression God. I recognize that not everybody does, but it's easier for me. And I just ask them to extend me grace if that's not what they believe. But being angry with God, and again, it goes back to the why did that happen? And a lot of times it calls all the things into question. And then I have other people who, for them, it helps root them into something strong and permanent that they can use in their life as a base to go out and interact, but to come back to that place of they know who they are because of their faith.
There's a couple things here that I want to expand on and step into. I remember really early on working with clients and hearing the same topic that you touched on of women who have a relationship with their higher power before marrying their spouse or their partner. They would reach out for that confirmation from their higher power through prayer, however they communicate, looking for, is this right? Is this the right next move? Is this the right person for me? And feeling like they received a confirmation, they received an answer or a sign, and then saying, okay, great. Like I got that rubber stamp from God or my higher power saying, yep, this is a good idea, move forward. It felt good, it felt right. And then when they're betrayed later on in their relationship, most of my clients didn't have words for this. And so if we look at all of the PTSD criteria, if we look at the who am I now? I don't know who I am. I don't know where I fit, not just with my spouse or partner, but oftentimes betrayal trauma also create that with the higher power. And if we look at that and say, this is something I've held on to my whole life, that it's been my anchor, and now I have to question that. Now I don't know who my identity is with my higher power. That's another layer, a very deep layer of destabilization that often occurs with the betrayal.
I can certainly see how someone may feel traumatized and looking desperately for somewhere to put blame, because a lot of times our partner gaslit us so much and denied and blamed and had us running around in circles mentally that we think that it's me, when in reality, it's the spouse or partner who has the issue.
What I often hear is, but God knew. I didn't have that informed consent. My husband was keeping us a secret, but God knew.
Right.
God knew this was going on, so how could he let that happen? And that's where I see so much of the anger and the destabilization show. What I see is it's not so much about the blame on myself as to God, and I had a connection to God and my understanding. And I felt like they knew. They knew what was going on, even at the time when I went and said, is this the right choice? And they didn't give me a sign. I didn't get any indication. And how could my higher power betray me and not let me know? That's the betrayal that I see, that it's not so much the internalization on me right there. It is the anger. You knew, and how could you not tell me? So my spouse didn't tell me, and you knew. And of all people who knows everything, if I believe that you know everything and have all power, why didn't you intercede somehow? Because I believe that you care about me. I believe that you love me. And I believe that when I trust in you and put my faith in you, that you're going to be there for me and guide me. And that didn't happen. And so how do I now make sense of that other than that you betrayed me? And oftentimes we also see God as a male figure. Not always, not for everybody, but oftentimes. And that can also tie into males knowing, having the power, and if we're female, it puts us more into that submissive state of not knowing.
When someone's going through that, and when they were dating their partner, they were prayerful about it and they were looking for signs to move forward, and there was nothing that came in and put a roadblock up there. I can see how they very much would feel betrayed that God didn't somehow stop that, when if they believe he's omniscient and knows everything, he knew, and he knew what was going to happen down the road. And I do want to validate that grief when I have a client that's talking like that, and the grief that comes along with that, all that comes with it, the anger, the feeling betrayed, giving them the opportunity to express that, because I really do believe that God can handle that. He gets that, why they would feel that way.
So what are some tools in that space? You have a client who's sitting there saying, like, I'm so angry. What are the tools that you use, Karen?
Well, one of the primary things is I would just listen to that and give that energy that they have a place to land, that the freedom to say that, because they might be part of a faith community that would be frowned upon. What do you mean you don't trust God? And we all need to wrestle with our faith and come to terms with the ideologies that we have on our own. We'll often share with my clients, if they're open to hearing this from a faith base, is that even the people that interacted with Jesus regularly, particularly the scriptural account when John the Baptist was imprisoned. And scripture tells us that his mother and Jesus's mother were related. So we can only assume that maybe growing up, they played together. They were about the same age. John the Baptist was a little bit older. But when John the Baptist was in prison, he had his disciples go to Jesus and say, "Are you really who you say you are?" And I think that's a question that we all have to ask. Are you really who you say you are? And there's growth in that wrestling. Years ago, I learned that if you're watching a butterfly come out of a cocoon, you see it struggling, you're like, well, let me just try to tear that cocoon just a little bit. You're going to have a butterfly that can't fly because it's in the coming out of that cocoon, the struggle of getting out, that there's growth. And that butterfly can then fly. And I feel like with betrayal trauma, that there is that struggle. And it's there in that struggle where we have growth. And if I try to fix it for my client, I'm impeding that struggle. Whatever decision they come to, it's really theirs. It's not just because, oh, Karen, my therapist said this. It's that they've wrestled with this and they've come to this conclusion on their own.
I'm hearing you talk about figuring out what's my foundation here.
Yes.
What's my foundation when my foundation with my higher power has been impacted? And I always want to just give lots of space to my clients and to our listeners and viewers, wherever you are on the spectrum. That's okay. We're talking about this because this is often part of the process and we want to bring home. This is real. This is part of the challenge of healing. And a couple of tools that I use in this space for my clients, especially in that anger, in that pain, in that despair, because this is another layer of saying like, oh, I don't just have to work on the betrayal from my spouse, but also what I'm experiencing, it feels like, from my higher power. I had a client who said, I just feel like I've just been in this darkness where even when I'm trying to reach up, it just feels like there's this thick fog and I'm not getting answers. I'm not getting support. And that's a really hard place to work for, that night of despair. And I also had a client that I'll never forget saying, my relationship with my higher power is really complicated. And sometimes I'm yelling and screaming and raging. And other times I'm a 5-year-old little girl just needing to be consoled. And whatever that looks like, that's okay. And so one of the tools that I really love to utilize here is letters. Well, say, hey, why don't you write a letter to your higher power, letter to God, whatever you want to call it, and everything that you're feeling and you're experiencing, write that in a letter and let it out. Be raw. Nobody's going to censor this. Nobody else needs to hear this, but just dump it all out there. All of your raw pain and anger, hurt, shame, everything that you're experiencing, let the rage out. Write that in the letter. And then if and when you're ready, write yourself a letter back. What it is that you feel like the response would be. What would the response be? This can be a very helpful tool to recognizing and really finding some validation and some insight.
MaryAnn, I love that idea of writing a letter to God and getting those feelings out. There is something about writing that out and it going from your brain out of your hand onto a piece of paper that I think can be very healing. And I love that. I also encourage my clients to feel the grief. I know that it's not a technique per se, but we have to feel things or they're going to keep nipping at our heels. So if we can feel it and be in those moments where we are sad, where we are questioning, that's a good thing. I encourage my clients to do that.
So the label I would put on that would be honor your emotions.
Yes.
Acknowledge them, validate them, and say, oh, I'm feeling betrayed by God and my higher power. I'm feeling rage or anger, and acknowledging it, giving ourselves permission to actually feel that. I know that might feel a little bit uncomfortable. So they just say that I can let my rage out at my higher power and say, yeah, I think they can handle it. Whatever your higher power is, whether it's the ocean, whether it's God, whether it's Buddha, whether it's your group, whatever it is, they can handle your rage. They can handle your pain.
Exactly. Honoring the emotions is paramount in healing. If
Right.
we stuff them, they will come out sideways later.
And this is part of the grieving is another relationship that needs to be healed and sometimes deconstructed and pulled apart. And my relationship might fundamentally shift. And that's a normal byproduct of betrayal. Relationships shift, they look different. We feel different in them. And they have to repair or they don't.
One of the things that my clients, if they're open to receiving this, is pointing out that it is in those hard times that a lot of times God is the closest to us, that He is with us, He is working in our lives. And we don't understand this because we're finite, He's infinite. Recognizing that for something good to come out of something very painful, that's hard for people. We don't like pain. I don't like pain. I do not like to suffer. But I do know that through some of the darkest nights of my life, that is where I've grown. I get super comfortable when things are easy, but it's when the hard things come that I can recognize that God allowed that in my life. And I don't understand that. I'm like, you could have stopped that. But the truth of the matter is He didn't. And I want to be open to receiving whatever has come my way.
I really resonate with that, Karen. I think a lot of people who work in our field have experienced oftentimes betrayal trauma or addiction, and it usually isn't the path most of us usually say, hey, this is where I think I'm gonna go. I'm sure you're familiar with Viktor Frankl. He wrote Man's Search for Meaning. I'm talking about if my higher power was allowing this to happen, knowing that this would happen, knowing how hard and how painful and how awful and horrible this would be, what is the purpose of that pain? And I love Frankl's work on we need to find that meaning. And he talks about when they were trying to eradicate polio, that they used, I think he said some kind of a primate, a monkey, but they would inject them with the vaccination to see if it worked. And to that animal in that moment being poked and injected with a disease, that couldn't have been pleasant. That had to have been miserable. And in that finite space of experiencing that pain, it didn't make sense. And that's what Frankl says. Sometimes we have to look up to the cosmos. Is there a greater cosmic power that I'm not aware of, that I don't understand, that I can try to put some faith or find some meaning or something someplace else? And sometimes that's just a surrender. I don't understand why I'm going through this right now. I don't understand why I feel this distance, or it doesn't make sense to me in my current state, why this could happen to me. And there's a place there where I can be a victim, or I can also say, and I'm going to grieve that. I'm going to experience all the emotions around that. And I think that higher cosmos is where we can find the hope that we need to move out of that place. For myself, 17 years into our journey, I really be on my knees talking to my higher power saying, if you knew the experiences that my husband would have growing up, if you knew that I would experience this for the first 17 years of our marriage, what do you want me to do with that? Because I want there to be a purpose for it. And when I started having those conversations with my higher power, my husband lost his job and we moved from Florida where we had really great sick folks. And I had doors open for me to go back to school. I had doors open that led me here. And for me personally, part of my story is hitting that space of why and how do I make sense and find reconciliation with my higher power and with my experience. How do I make sense of this? And Karen, one of the things that I've learned that I believe is my story's not over and your story's not over. And for our listeners and viewers, your stories aren't over either. And we don't just get through things and then it's over and we move on. We're changed. The world changes. As you were mentioning before, the chrysalis, there's strength that comes out of that. I want to shift back just a little bit. I want to talk a little bit about the shift in the beliefs about ourselves that can occur in relation to our higher power when we've been betrayed. So I'm wondering your thoughts about that, Karen.
Well, certainly the beliefs that I hold about myself, that you hold about yourself, impact how we think. And then those same thought patterns are indicative of how we're going to behave. And I think that it's very important during this time of betrayal and grief that we do look at what we believe about ourselves, because that's going to fuel the direction that we go in. And a lot of times there's so much trauma, we take on a lot of blame for ourselves. A lot of times when there is betrayal, we began believing lies about ourselves, that I wasn't enough. If I were more whatever, this wouldn't have happened. If I were less whatever, this wouldn't have happened. And the list is endless. And we take on a lot of that blame. And working with my clients, I try to help them align their thought processes, their thoughts about themselves I try to help them align that up with what God says about them.
One of the things I often hear with this, especially if you're a female and you have children, I hear a lot of pain and grief around because of this betrayal. I'm so disconnected. I'm not there for my kids. I'm a really bad mom. There's a lot of self-mom shame that I often see. And seeing my kids suffer can also get connected to my anger towards my higher power as well. So I've seen some really difficult divorces and situations, and my clients so hurt. Like, how can you let this happen to my kids? How can my kids be the victims of this? And so once again, a lot of pain in these beliefs and this questioning, how could this happen? Or I deserve this. And these lies seep into our belief system and how we see ourselves. And once again, with betrayal trauma, we often lose the ability to trust ourselves and others. And so things look darker. And so, Karen, tool that you use or a lens that you see this through.
Years ago, my husband had to leave his surgical career because of health issues. And it was awful. It was just a terrible time in his life. And as a result, the tentacles of that were rough for me as well as our children. And a lady I didn't even really know that well looked at me and she says, never forget that God doesn't waste anything and he will not waste this experience in your life. And I've always remembered that. I don't even know this lady's name. And I try to help my clients see that there will be a time that they'll hear of somebody in their world that is going through a similar situation. And my client will be ahead of her in her journey and can be part of reaching out to her and being a support to her.
Learn and turn.
Yeah.
12 steps. We talk about turning and lending a hand, lending a hand.
Yes. You will see the world differently because you've had your eyes open to some really hard things. And maybe in the past, you wouldn't have known what to do for that person. But maybe now, because you yourself have known that pain, can reach out and be supportive in a way that you wouldn't have before. It doesn't make it easier, but it does help see purpose in the pain and in the suffering that comes along with it. I think that we tend to have an expectation of ourselves that we're going to be able to do this or we're not going to be able to do it. We tell ourselves all kinds of lies. When I have a client who is believing lies about herself, I first will challenge that. When she shares that with me, I will challenge her on that. And in addition, I use that as an opportunity to teach my clients about that wonderful concept of self-compassion. And I know you've probably talked about it in your podcast, but that we're kind to ourselves. So if I'm saying things to myself that I'm not enough or that I'm too much or that if only whatever, I'm going to challenge that. And for my women that I see that have a faith, I'll say, is that something that God would say about you? And if it's not something God would say, then I challenge that again and we come up with what is really true of her. And then so there's that kindness about ourselves. We want to speak to ourselves with words that bring life. And if I'm not speaking kind things to myself, I need to change that. And then, of course, the other two components of self-compassion are living mindfully, and that helps you be in the moment, helps you be aware of the way you're speaking to yourself and the thoughts that you're thinking. And then the last one is recognizing we're all part of a common humanity. Everyone has their stuff. And I do think that we tend to think, oh, well, she's got it all together. And I think social media has kind of made us think that people have these really happy, wonderful lives, but it's like their highlight reel. And we don't ever know what goes on behind closed doors. And we need to be real quick not to compare ourselves with other people. Comparison is deadly. And that for whatever reason, you're where you are and that you're not alone and that people are there for you. And if you're open to your higher power, that is a great time to really lean into that.
So if I were to sum up everything that you just said, here I am with my label maker again. I'm hearing you talk about is vulnerability.
Yes.
So if your clients are coming to you and sharing, this is finding safe places to say, I'm really struggling. I'm deconstructing and dismantling what I thought I knew before. And I'm trying to make sense of it. So for our listeners, I would love for you to write down the lies that you're telling yourself, or even the beliefs that you have right now, and find someone who's safe and trusted, or multiple people. If it doesn't feel like a higher power is an option for you right now, find other safe, trusted people and step into that vulnerability of saying, here's what I'm believing about myself. Here's what I've been telling myself. I've been telling myself that I'm a really bad mom. I've been telling myself that My kids would be better off without. I've been telling myself that my spouse or partner made these choices because my body's not good. I've been telling myself that I'm unlovable because if I were lovable, the God of my understanding would have not let this happen. Take whatever your variation of these thoughts or beliefs might be, take them to other people that you trust and ask for support. And what I heard you say, Karen, is that you would push back on them, that you would help, that you would gently push back on.
Yes. And if my client wrote down the lies, then we're going to write the truth. I want her or him to write the truth. And then I want them to say those. Pick one or two a day and say those things to themselves. I am lovable. I am deserving. I am worthy. Speaking truth to yourself and not continuing to lie to yourself.
And writing down the lie or the belief, and then giving yourself a couple of minutes just to feel, where do I feel that in my body? Where do I feel that emotion? Because we don't want to skip over the emotions because there's what I believe is, where is it in my body? What am I feeling? And allowing myself just to sit with it, just to feel it, not pushing it away. Might feel a little bit overwhelming, and that's okay. You're just sticking with it. And then saying, okay, and now I'm going to start to critically think about it and I'm going to challenge that, just as you said. And I'm going to find the lie, really find what's the lie that's in here. And I call it find the lie and flip it. And if I'm struggling with that, that is where we want that help from other people, outside sources.
And that could even be built upon to trace back, where did I first learn to believe that? Because chances are it's not something that just popped in your head. It's been an undercurrent for much longer in your life, and addressing that, perhaps with a professional, might be helpful if needed.
Yeah. So I think as we wrap up, what's the message of hope that you would like to share?
We've talked about a lot, MaryAnn, and the takeaway that I would want the listeners to know is that there is purpose in the pain, and to be open to that purpose, even though you don't understand it. And you might not ever fully understand it. I mean, how can we understand betrayal? It's a horrible thing. But to know that in that, there can be hope and there can be goodness through that process.
Thank you, Karen. I think my wrap up for today really just comes down to reduce down what we've been talking about today. And this is part of betrayal is finding your footing, finding your foundation. And for many individuals who've been betrayed, it requires some work of examining our relationship with our higher power and looking at or addressing the betrayal if it feels like we've been betrayed there. And this is a messy middle. This is the place where things feel really hard, and they are hard because it's messy. You don't have all the answers. You're looking for tools and strategies to get through. And this is a really hard part of the journey for many individuals. You're not alone. Reach out for help, reach out for support. And as you said, Karen, if you're in this space, give yourself compassion and be kind to yourself. And please honor whatever emotions you're having and reach out to others who have been there or others who love you, who care about you, who can provide gentleness, kindness. And I would also encourage you to look in your life and see if you can notice the imprint somewhere of a higher power and how a higher power, whatever that looks like, might speak to you. Whether it's standing on the beach with your feet in the water, whether it's seeing a sunrise or a sunset, whether it's hearing a child laugh. Open your eyes and look and see if you can find that imprint of a higher power who's aware that can be an anchor for you. That's my hope today.
Thank you, MaryAnn, for the opportunity and for just sharing from your heart. I always enjoy listening to your podcast and from you and the guests that you have. Thank you for letting me be a part.
Thank you, Karen. I always appreciate the wisdom that you bring, the gentleness and the compassionateness that you bring to this. It's always a great discussion. So thank you, and we will see you next week.